Good morning, everybody, and I hope you're enjoying this snowy Sunday morning. It's a big day today. It's election day in Russia. Yes, that's right. Vladimir Putin is up for re-election for another 6-year term. His main opponent has been disqualified from the contest. Funny that, isn't it? On a fraud charge. And I think I can say with some accuracy that he is going to win the election by a complete and utter landslide. I'm quite certain he would have won it by a landslide, with or without what has been happening in terms of their relationship with the United Kingdom and indeed with the rest of the Western world. Now, we've been met, as this week has gone on, by a degree of total and absolute certainty from the establishment that it was the Kremlin directly responsible for the nerve agent that was used in Salisbury. Boris I think, maybe you think he was jumping the gun, maybe you don't. But just let's have a listen to Boris Johnson speaking in his Uxbridge constituency in West London on Friday.
Our quarrel is with Putin's Kremlin and with his decision. And we think it overwhelmingly likely that it was his decision to direct the use of a nerve agent on the streets of the UK, on the streets of Europe, for the first time since the Second World War.
Moscow not impressed with that and calling Boris Johnson's claim that it's overwhelmingly likely. They said it's shocking and unforgivable. And yesterday, Theresa May, having had arguably the best week of her premiership, I mean, when you saw her walking around the market square in Salisbury this week, I've never seen her look happier, frankly. And she spoke yesterday at the Tory party's spring conference, and she says that, you know, there may be more coming from the UK government in the coming days.
In light of their previous behaviour, we anticipated a response of this kind, and we will consider our next steps in the coming days, alongside our allies and partners. But Russia's response doesn't change the facts of the matter. The attempted assassination of 2 people on British soil, for which there is no alternative conclusion other than that the Russian state was culpable.
So, as I say, an absolute degree of certainty here. And another giant of British politics, our Defence Secretary Gavin Williamson speaking last week.
Frankly, Russia should go away, it should shut up.
Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Well, let's not take him too seriously. But I tell you what, when the Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary, say it's overwhelmingly likely, there's one little question that I want to ask. And by the way, I've said from the start of this, I do believe that it's a Russian actor. It's in keeping with many of the things that we see happen to former Russian spies and to those who cross the Putin regime. I have little doubt that it's a Russian actor. I'm just not absolutely certain, and from the looks of it, nobody is certain that this was directed by Putin. I mean, why? Why would he do it when they've got the World Cup coming up in a few months? I mean, the big showcase, I thought, for Putin's modern Russia. I don't know is the answer, and no one does. And I would say, if the government do have this evidence, well, can we please see it? Now, I'm not the only mildly sceptical voice on this, because Peter Hitchens today in the Mail on Sunday wrote a very, very strong piece where he said that Jeremy Corbyn has a better record on foreign policy than almost anyone in Parliament. And that's going to be quite a big surprise to a lot of Mail on Sunday readers this morning and those of a Conservative disposition. Well, I caught up with Peter Hitchens earlier on this morning. He was out walking in the snow, so you may just hear a slight crackle of the wind from the mini beast from the east. Let's listen to Peter.
Well, I'm not sure that Mr. Corbyn said it was anybody else. I think what he said was that we should hesitate before rushing into action without any actual final determination of the facts.
Yep.
Which is the lesson, after all, which is the lesson of Iraq, where we were told that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction trained on this country, and it was all a complete pile of round objects, as seemed obvious to me at the time. This is different in many ways. We're not proposing to go to war at the moment, and I personally think, and I think Mr. Corbyn has said that it's reasonable for us to take action, but we mustn't rush to judgment on the facts. It's not as if we're hanging people or opening fire. We're just taking diplomatic action against Russia on the assumption that the huge amount of circumstantial evidence points towards them. My own view is that it is most likely a Russian operation. And I don't think there's any point in really messing around about that. But that doesn't mean that there shouldn't be caution both about the gathering of the evidence and the conclusions that we draw, and also, I should add, caution about what we actually do.
Peter, what happens now? I mean, are we ever likely to find out? And I agree with you, it was almost certainly a Russian operative, but whether it was a rogue agent or somebody directed by the Kremlin, do you think we'll ever find out the truth of this?
Well, it's quite possible we won't. We haven't ever really found out who killed Alexander Litvinenko either, and I think it's quite possible we never will. These things are extremely hard to determine, and if they're competently done by the wicked people who do them, they deliberately make it hard for us to know.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, they also are happy for us to suspect them, because it's my view the Russians conducted this operation precisely to frighten us.
And finally, Peter, the Prime Minister was there in Salisbury, fist-bumping young members of the audience. I've never seen her look so radiant. Does this mark a turning point in Theresa May's popularity?
Oh, good heavens, I don't know. I mean, it does seem to me to be a great pity that the prospect of foreign conflict can elevate politicians who are otherwise undistinguished to a position of national leadership and popularity. But I suppose, given how miserable her popularity ratings have been for so long, she can't really be blamed for taking a bit of popularity when it comes. But no, I think that ultimately the fact that this is not a particularly competent or effective government, or a very strong one, or a very decisive one, won't be overcome by a brief frenzy of patriotic enthusiasm.
No, and she faces a very big challenge this week. Of course, she goes to Brussels on Thursday, the big European summit, at which we're supposed to agree the transition. I wonder whether she'll be as tough there as she has appeared over Russia.
Well, it's a good deal easier to be tough on the Russian bogeyman, because you're basically being tough on him with your mouth, than it is to be tough with the European Union, which has many, many wiles and methods of tripping up and entangling British Prime Ministers.
Well, that was Peter Hitchens, Mail on Sunday commentator, making the point that he, like me, thinks it was a Russian actor, but should we not perhaps have a little bit more proof before we rush to action and before this game of tit for tat escalates? You know, we are expelling 23. Where do they get the figure 23 from? I do not know. But we're expelling 23 diplomats, and in return, the Russians are expelling 23 of ours from Moscow and closing down the British Council. Breaking news in the last hour. Experts from the Organisation for the Protection of Chemical Weapons will come to the UK on Monday to test samples of the nerve agent used in the Salisbury spy poisoning, Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson has said. So let's have a little think about that. We've said it's overwhelmingly likely that it's the Kremlin. Boris said that himself. But we're now going to test it to try and get the facts. That's how it seems to me, folks. Please tell me, has the government provided you with enough evidence to make up your mind as to who was behind this poisoning? And if you think Mrs. May is absolutely, of course she's right, she's playing an heroic role in all of this, then call me on 0345 6060 973, or perhaps you take the view that I take, Peter Hitchens takes, and to some extent Jeremy Corbyn takes, which is to say, please can we have a bit more evidence before this new Cold War escalates any further, in which case text to 84850. And I'm interested, do you actually believe anything our politicians say and our leaders say about anything anymore? And let me know your thoughts on that by tweeting using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and you can of course watch us on Facebook. I'm live from the LBC studio here in London. Right. We've had our clips, we've spoken to our commentator, but remember, the whole point of this show on a Sunday morning is you can turn on to radio channels and TV channels and you'll see a whole load of journalists talking to a whole load of journalists. And this is the one place, LBC, where the public get to come and have their say. And my first caller today is Jeff, who's calling from Munich. Good morning, Jeff.
Good morning, Nigel. Yeah, greetings from Munich for Trout Fine, trusted enemy again. Yeah? We've spoken to each other in the past.
I remember, yeah.
Mate, yeah.
I remember. So, Jeff, have the government provided, in your opinion, enough evidence to make it certain that what happened in Salisbury was sanctioned by Mr. Putin himself?
I absolutely dislike this government, and particularly Boris Johnson, Theresa May. But in this issue, I think that on the basis of the balance of probabilities, because there is never going to be 100% proof that they are doing the right thing on the basis of what they know. They're never going to find somebody who's going to say, I did this. And it is as far along as it could possibly be. And, to open a suitcase with nerve agents in the United Kingdom, which didn't only just injure a policeman, but could have caused extreme damage in the Salisbury town to many, many people, is an extreme act.
Oh, Jeff, no one's disagreeing with that. I mean, look, it is, and I've been arguing that had this occurred as a result of an Islamist group or a far-right group, we'd be calling it terrorism. So I'm not downplaying the seriousness of what happened. But, Jeff, you talk about the balance of probabilities. So let's imagine, Jeff, you got yourself caught up in a very complex case that went to trial over fraud, and you were defending your innocence. And I was the judge, and I said, yeah, but, Jeff, the balance of probabilities is that you're probably guilty and you're going to prison. You wouldn't be very happy, would you?
Well, I would think that on a local level, on that basis, there would be a higher level of proof. When you're dealing with a professional, country like Russia, who deal, with these things, who have their own agencies, who are experts in, covert operations and hiding themselves, it's a little bit difficult to compare the two things, though, isn't it, Nigel? Yeah?
Well, I'm not sure, Jeff. I'm not sure. I mean, I worry that we're going helter-skelter into a new Cold War. Goodness knows where it all ends up. And I would like a little bit more evidence than we've got at the moment.
Could I ask you one more question, Nigel, yeah?
Yeah.
To slide the point a little bit to the side, if you'll forgive me, if you'll allow me to do that. Huh?
Briefly, yes, go on.
Very briefly. We are leaving the European Union, and you're the Godzilla of Brexit, and, I respect you for that. And we are going to find ourselves standing very much alone like we did in 1940. Is this the time to push our allies away when there are dangers around?
Absolutely. We need our European friends with us. I heard Frans Timmermans in the European Parliament this week making that point. And then it all went pear-shaped because somebody that works for President Macron said Britain had rushed to judgment. But very, very soon he was slapped down and there was the voice of unanimity. And I can see now at the European Summit on Thursday, Mr. Juncker, best they catch him before lunch, I suppose, but Mr. Juncker saying this proves European solidarity and why we must all be together. And I'd respond, Jeff, by saying, had it not been for the crazy ideas of the European Union and NATO to expand in an eastward direction to try and take the Ukraine into their empires, we might not be here in the first place. Jeff, I've got to go. I thank you, Jeff. Do call again. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show. On text, Tony from Milton Keynes says the use of weapons of mass destruction on UK soil has been shown to have emanated from the Russian Federation, regardless of the characters who implemented it. Well, what Tony, of course, is referring to is that the nerve agent is said to only have been made there. But let's listen, because we must hear the other side of the argument, whether we trust them or it or not. But let's listen to Vladimir Chizhov, and he is Russia's EU ambassador. And by the way, before the conspiracy theories start and the photographs appear, I did once shake his hand outside the European Parliament building, because he proffered it to me. I didn't know who he was from Adam. But let's listen to what he had to say, because he suggested that a UK research laboratory could be the source of this nerve agent that was used. He was on the Andrew Marr programme this morning, and he insists that Russia had nothing to do with the poisoning in Salisbury of Sergei Skripal and his daughter, Yulia.
When you have a nerve agent or whatever, you check it against certain samples that you retain in your laboratories. And Porton Down, as we now all know, is the largest military facility in the United Kingdom that has been dealing with chemical weapons research. And it's actually only 8 miles from Salisbury.
You're not suggesting that Porton Down is responsible for this nerve agent?
I don't know. I don't have any evidence of anything having been used.
Well, maybe we're going to get more evidence because Boris Johnson, has now said that there is going to be a proper investigation because tomorrow experts from the Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons will be in the United Kingdom to test samples of that nerve agent. What a pity, Boris, you didn't call them in a few days before. It might have ended. What I still think is a degree of uncertainty out there. Yeah, I know that the political establishment are all lined up behind this. I know there is a big consensus, and there are very, very few sceptical voices. But, I've seen these consensus build-ups in politics before. I saw it over Libya. I saw it over the Iraq War, and they were wrong on both of those occasions. So, forgive me, a degree of scepticism about this. I want to see a little bit more evidence to convince me that it is Vladimir Putin. I have no doubt that it is a Russian actor of some kind. And I sense in the country, certainly over the course of the last week, with the calls, texts, tweets, Facebook messages coming into LBC, that there is far less trust in what governments and prime ministers tell us than has ever been before. That's what I think, but hey, you tell me. Rudy is calling from Exeter. Good morning, Rudy.
Yeah, hi, Nigel. I think one of the questions that people haven't asked is, first of all, how did the chemicals get into the UK in the first place? And, it shows that, obviously, they've got no control over our borders, what goes in, what goes out, which then puts another question of free movement of people. So I actually blame the government because they're not doing enough to protect our borders.
Well, Rudy, one of the suggestions was that actually this nerve agent had been placed inside her suitcase when she was on a trip to Moscow. That's one explanation, but we don't know the answer. And of course, the worry is, with all of this, we may never know what the answers are. Rudy, very, very few people have been as critical of the last few governments over the free movement of peoples, the threat that it poses perhaps to security, as me. I think in the case of a nerve agent that's stuffed inside someone's suitcase, it's a little bit difficult to pin this one on the government.
But you say that, but do you know that they're doing you for a can of hairspray going through the X-ray machine? And you're telling me they can't detect something in the suitcase? It's like a friend of mine had a watch he bought from England and went back to America. They withheld his bag at customs in America because they found a watch box in his bag. Yeah. And you're telling me they can't find that with nerve agents?
I don't know. I'm not an expert on this. I'd love somebody, please, on 0345 6060 973, who's involved with airport security, to give us the answer to this. But, Rudy, I suspect that detecting a powder in some small trace form would be an incredibly hard thing to do.
Oh, you say that, Nigel, but you see these Australian border security programs, and they pick up absolutely everything going through their security. Absolutely. If something's not right when it goes through the X-ray, they know exactly what it is.
There is one explanation, Rudy, and let's, if we can find the technicals on this, we will. But there is one other explanation, Rudy, that's just come to me that might put this closer to the Russian government and Putin than anything we've seen before, because there is something called the diplomatic bag. And diplomats go back and forth between countries with a diplomatic bag, which is not to be checked. So if it was indeed Putin who said, get that traitor wiped out and get it done before my elections on Sunday, because it's going to make me even more popular than I was before. If that's what Putin said, then putting that nerve agent inside a diplomatic bag would get it into this country, Rudy, without any checks.
I absolutely agree with you on that, which also gives me the question of then, if maybe that the way the world is with free movement of people and so on, that rule should be now abolished because you should put your citizens first over and above everything else.
Well, if you have a foreign power that you think poses a threat to you, you wouldn't actually allow them diplomatic status, and you'd close the embassy down. Rudy, interesting questions, don't know the answers, but anybody out there that knows how airport security works, because she would have flown back from Moscow to this country, please let us know. Tony is a first-time caller to this show, and he lives in Leighton. Good morning, Tony.
Good morning, Nigel. First time I'm speaking to you. I hardly ever agree with you.
Right. Good morning.
Good morning, but today I think I will.
Okay.
Just before I start, Rudy, I don't think he should be shoehorning freedom of movement into this conversation. Whether we're part of the EU or not, this thing could still have happened.
Well, of all the people, Tony, it was me that shot that argument down, okay?
Right, okay, yes. Well, that's why, as you see, I've already agreed with you. So some more brownie points for you.
Well, it's Sunday morning, Tony. It's a time for people to come together, you know, and maybe be a bit more collegiate.
Well, my point, basically, where I called was that I have no doubt myself that it's the Russians, but for reasons of past form with WADA and other things, and I know the Russians are going to deny it, but Tony Blair have left us the legacy that we now have. The government has to provide us with the information as to how they've arrived at their conclusion that it's the Russians. You know, I'm prepared to go with our government because I would rather believe our government over the Russians. But that's not really going to be good enough to take action without telling us how they've arrived at their conclusion. And actually, Corbyn was the only one who seemed to ask for caution. I don't recall you supporting Corbyn at the time, though, Nigel.
Tony, I was one of the most vociferous voices against us going to war in Libya, against us getting involved in Syria, and indeed against Iraq. And if you want to go back and look through previous clips of Question Time, going back 14, 15 years, yes, I've oddly found myself on foreign policy quite often on the non-interventionist side of Jeremy Corbyn. Although, can I just say, I'm not a fan of Hamas, Hezbollah, Sinn Féin or the IRA commanders.
Yes, and I'm not talking about those past wars that we needlessly entered into. It's just this current one. What I find is that, I mean, yes, I think with you've actually shown that sometimes you put your beliefs above the politics. But some people don't seem to be able to do that.
I know.
So once it was Jeremy Corbyn speaking, they all said, "Oh, Jeremy Corbyn, he's always he's an apologist all the time."
Tony, in conclusion,
the right thing.
Tony, in conclusion, you want to see some more evidence, yeah?
Yes.
Absolutely. Thank you. We've got to move on. Well, if Boris hasn't persuaded you, if Theresa May hasn't persuaded you, maybe that modern-day giant of UK politics, Gavin Williamson, our Defence Secretary, can persuade you.
Frankly, Russia should go away. It should shut up.
That is the calibre of people we now have leading our country. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusive in LBC. So Boris Johnson tells us this morning that tomorrow experts from the Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons are coming to the UK to test samples of the nerve agent that was used in the poisoning attack in Salisbury. And there are some who would say, well, might it not have been better to get these people involved earlier and to have a slightly higher degree of certitude than we currently have about who really was behind this? Have the government done enough to provide you with evidence as to who it was? Now, I asked earlier, would somebody please, who has worked in or knows about airport security, get on the line? And Glenn has called in from Hull. Good morning, Glenn.
Good morning.
Good morning. Now, without wishing to give away secrets that might threaten our security in the future, the question specifically was, if some of this nerve agent was in a suitcase, would the scanners at either British or other international airports be likely to pick it up?
Well, to put you in the picture, all airports work to a standard.
Yep. And
so every airport is the same. And there are 3 levels of security. And every X-ray machine is designed to pick up organic product. So if it was in a large enough amount, not sprayed, it would pick it up.
So if this was, Glenn, if this was in a relatively tiny amount, being a very potent nerve agent, if it was a tiny amount of, say, powder, would that really get picked up?
Yes, because it displays in different colours on the screen.
Oh.
So it's organic. It will see that there's something there, and they would direct it to the next security.
Well, not only, Glenn, have you enlightened us as to how this works, you've made us all feel a bit safer, actually, this morning. So then, logically then, from what you're saying, would you consider it unlikely that the story that it was put into a suitcase in Moscow was true?
Well, to give you an idea, if it was the size of a Smartie, maybe they would ignore it. As I say, there are 3 different levels, so it's an automatic system. So the first level says, oh, it's okay. or it says, no, there's something wrong, it goes to second level. And then if it doesn't pass the second level, it goes to third level inspection.
Right. But the basic fact is that airport scanners would pick this up, and that's the point that you've made on this call, and it's a
Of course, yeah.
No, Glenn, thank you.
They also have different scanners that pick up radiation. So how that other guy got
that was polonium, wasn't it?
polonium, yeah, we'll pick that up as well.
Glenn, it all looks to me that maybe these pieces of evidence do point to diplomatic bags. That maybe we've uncovered something here that maybe does point more directly towards it being somebody associated directly with the Russian administration. I don't know. Fascinating.
Well, I was working in that section, and as soon as someone like that comes through, we have to move away.
Yes.
We're not allowed to be in that area.
So the diplomatic bag, Glenn, is still sacrosanct, yeah?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. Glenn, great phone call, thank you. Well, wasn't that interesting, folks? That was really, really interesting. I mean, I'd no idea that our airport scanners were quite as sophisticated as that. That was really, really fascinating. So could it be a theory I've not read anywhere, but could it be the diplomatic bag that has been used? And is that perhaps an even better reason for getting rid of 23? Why 23, I don't know, but 23 diplomats. As I say, I believe that it was a Russian actor. I just find it extraordinary that anybody saying, can we have a bit more proof, please, is almost being shouted down as if they're sided with the enemy. Peter on Twitter says, in the best traditions of the KGB, spread as much propaganda and conspiracy theories as you can so that people start doubting everything. Well, maybe you could argue that's what the Russian ambassador to the European Union was doing this morning by talking about Porton Down, and could the agent have come from there? Pete on Facebook says, an active nerve agent was not in the suitcase. If there was any suspicion, then whole airports will have to be closed down, perhaps for weeks. OK, well, somebody else there backing up the idea that it would not have come through a suitcase because it would have been discovered. Gary is a first-time caller to this show. He lives in Weybridge in Surrey. Good morning.
Good morning, Nigel. I find this whole question very interesting, and the issue that I'd like to look at is who benefits. I can't see any gain to Putin right now from this rather clumsy activity, and it's rather obvious. But there are actors in the US who have been pushing an anti-Russia narrative for some time, who have got skin in the game to keep Russia front of news. And just as the House Intelligence Committee rules that there's no case against Trump collusion with Russia, all of a sudden this pops up, and it's remarkably convenient. It doesn't really help Mrs. May in what she's got on her plate at the moment.
Well, actually, Gary, it does a little bit, doesn't it?
I don't think so. She's got enough to deal with Brexit. She's got
When did you... Now, come on, Gary. When did you see this Prime Minister, one, smile, genuinely smile, and two, fist bump people in the crowd and do selfies?
Well, the point is that if it helps her, it's purely as a distraction and a deflection. And you end up with another point, which is that Boris Johnson also colluded on the Steele dossier in its production with the anti-Trump campaign. So there's a whole question of who is behind this. I have no doubt it was done through the form of a diplomatic bag. The question is, whose diplomatic bag was it carried in?
Yeah, no, okay, well, you are right to say that those that can't reconcile themselves with the 45th President of the USA, Donald, being in the White House, and those who hate Brexit want Russia to be there as the evil enemy. So you could say that the more anti-Russia all of the narrative is, the better. But in terms,
what's to gain?
So you're really suggesting, Gary, that this could be a third country that has interfered here, in your opinion?
I could think that there's one country in particular that's interfered in elections across Europe and in Israel, and it's not called Russia; it's called the United States. And it's not the administration, but rather the forces aligned to Comey and Hillary and
Rosenstein, the ones that Trump's at war with at the moment. Yeah,
or at war with Trump, I should say.
Gary, fascinating. Thank you. I'm going to move to Reading, to Chris, another first-time caller to this show. Good morning, Chris.
Good morning, and I've got great respect for you for everything that you've done, so I thought I'd get that in.
That's very sweet of you, Chris. Very sweet of you. So what do you think?
I think it suits the establishment to make Russia the bogeyman, and similar to what the guy just was saying. I mean, if you look at the establishment, how they've lied when they need to lie or want to lie with the Iraq war, Brexit, and I think we've forgotten, people make out that this country is whiter than white. There was a guy called David Kelly.
Yep.
I think people have forgotten about him, and a few others. And what that guy was just saying, I mean, I looked, the guy himself who's been poisoned and his daughter, he was actually connected with the MI5 agent who was involved in the Trump dossier.
Christopher Steele. That's right.
That's right. He was
Christopher Steele, who produced the Trump document, and it turned out later was actually paid quite a bit of money for doing all of this. But yes, you're right, there was a connection.
And, I think, I just don't trust the forces in this, certain forces in this country or America, quite honestly.
Chris, did you always feel like this? Or is this something that, has your mind changed on this in the last 10 years or so?
Well, since the Iraq War, definitely.
Since the Iraq War, wow.
And since certain things like Jimmy Savile and that sort of thing, you just think, no, this isn't
Chris,
something to miss.
I have to tell you, Chris, I genuinely believe that there are millions of people like you out there now in this country. So great is the breakdown of trust in our career, professional, political class. I really do.
Absolutely. I mean, what makes me laugh is you've got liberals. And the Liberals, years ago, used to be people for peace and this, that and the other.
There's one of them ringing you now, Chris.
You're absolutely right. You're psychic, mate. You're absolutely psychic.
Chris, I've got to move on. Thank you for the call. And Chris, a breakdown of trust, there's plenty of it. More breaking news. The results of tests by the independent investigators from the Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons on the samples of nerve agent used in Salisbury. They're expected the test to take a minimum of 2 weeks. The Foreign Office have just told us. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show. Do we trust our government? Do we trust politicians? Do we think enough evidence has been provided to us by the government to say with certainty that Vladimir Putin was directly behind the spy poisoning scandal that took place in Salisbury? That is the question. And I, for one moment, don't doubt that it was a Russian actor. Whether it was sanctioned or not, I simply don't know. Paul says on Facebook, Russia is innocent until proven guilty. So far, the poison is Russian. But how did the poison get to the UK, and who did it? Well, one potential idea that's been floated here this morning is that it'd be very, very difficult for this substance to get through any airport security, and therefore it could have come into the country via a diplomatic bag, a Russian bag. I said, but one caller said, oh, well, actually, this could be the deep state in America who want to prolong this battle, this new Cold War we've got with Russia. So theories abound. Deborah says, airport security is tight. I got stopped at Manchester Airport 10 years ago, and my hand luggage was searched. They looked inside my shampoo bottle, and I've never smoked or done drugs. Deborah, we believe you. Honestly, we do. Ash is calling from Exeter. Good morning, Ash.
Hello, mate. It's Essex, not Exeter, but that doesn't matter.
Oh, is it? Oh, that's my mistake. The thing is, Ash, the truth is, I probably now need to accept defeat and start wearing glasses, but I'm just too vain. Ash from Essex, good morning.
Morning, Nigel. This is... the question was asked on here the other day, I think it was James O'Brien asked, obviously, should we be right to knock Corbyn for, wanting more evidence? Now, I can't stand Corbyn personally. I don't trust the bloke, but I totally agree with him. The claims that Theresa May and the current government have been making, they wouldn't stand up in a court of law.
Nope. No, they wouldn't. No, they wouldn't, Ash. And I said to that caller earlier, I said, what if you were on a complex fraud trial? And the judge said, well, the balance of probabilities, actually, Jeff, is that you're guilty. I mean, that wouldn't be a very nice place to be, would it?
And of course it wouldn't. And it wouldn't stand up in a court of law. And they can't expect us to just take that on the chin as their word is gospel. We all know we can't always check, I can't think of the word now. We can't always trust our security service, not just ours, but how many years did the CIA try and kill Castro and denied all knowledge of it? You know,
Well, Ash, are you saying to me...
What worries me...
Ash, are you saying to me... And by the way, what part of Essex are you from?
Chelmsford.
Chelmsford. The county town of Essex.
The county town.
Absolutely, with a cricket ground and all the rest of it. Are you... Not a very good side, but never mind. Ash, are you saying to me that you have a distrust of governments and our security agencies?
I just think that we should be careful in what we believe. You know, don't get me wrong, I agree with you. I think, chances are, it probably was Russian-backed, whether it be backed by Putin and the Kremlin or, you know, someone going off on their own. But one's got to ask themselves, you know, Skripal's been in this country a long time now. What does Putin gain from killing him now? You know.
Well, I suppose the answer to that is a message that you can run but you can't hide. If you betray us, at some point we'll get back at you. And it could be, Ash, that the electors who are going to the polls today in Russia say, "God, isn't that great? He's killed this traitor." Can you imagine if anybody that had betrayed this country, you know, was seen to have been taken out, living in a safe hideaway somewhere? Actually, I know what the tabloids would say. I know what Ash, I've got to move on. Great to speak to you. Hi, Nigel. The fist pump was requested by the people who wanted the picture with May. She is managing this incident well. Maybe the nerve agent came in by boat, where the same security does not exist. Lots of private yachts around, Martin from East Ham. Yes, Martin, there are lots of private yachts around, and there are over 100 ports in this country, and that's ports where goods come in of some, you know, variety and kind. A lot of it's fish going out, whatever it may be. But coasts are a weak point. Of that, there's no doubt at all. And yes, I know that the fist bump was requested from May, but she was visiting the scene of a crime, and there are two people who we're told this morning are close to death in hospital. I would have thought there is a way of behaving appropriately, and I thought she looked a bit too joyous. Hey, that's just me. James is calling from Southampton, a first-time caller to this show. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Nigel. Forgive me, I'm a little nervous.
Well, I tell you what, just imagine, James, that we're having a cup of tea together or a pint,
very much look forward to
and you just happen to be on LBC. That's by the by. You know, has this government, James, provided you with enough evidence to say it was Putin what done it?
In a word, no. Just no. Okay. There are so many questions which have just not been answered, and there are so many points which are either being misrepresented or... I hate to say deliberately, but there's just so much confusion about it. As I told your researcher, I've basically become a bit of a Russifier over the past 8 years or so. I started learning about it at GCSE. Okay. I got hooked, and I went the extra mile to read up. I've even learned a little bit of the Russian language to try and learn what their own newspapers say and stuff.
Wow!
Language.
Wow! Well, I mean, listen, you know more than I do. So I'm all ears. I really am.
Okay. Well, first of all, this Agent Skripal, he was originally working for the GRU. He was caught, and he was sentenced to prison.
Yep.
If he was wanted to be killed, why wasn't he killed then?
Mm-hmm.
Then he was set free in an agent exchange program. Now, the world of spying is a very particular spiel. For all we know, he still was spying. So that's a question which hasn't been answered, and I'm not suggesting any conspiracies here, but we don't know the answers to that. I mean, he could have even been a triple agent being released on condition that he puts information back to the GRU or the SVR. So that's stage one. Stage two is who actually benefits. Why would you pick a if this was state-acted, probably the SVR, because the FSB is domestic. If the SVR did...
You're going into a lot of detail here, James, that others listening to this show won't understand.
Okay, the FSB is the equivalent of MI5, that's the Domestic Federal Security Service. The SVR is their kind of equivalent of MI6, which is a foreign intelligence service, and the GRU is the Military Intelligence Directorate, so they're kind of the equivalent of the US, the Department of Defense Intelligence Department, DID.
Okay, go on.
There's a lot of agencies there.
Yeah, there are.
Why would you pick a method which is so obviously state-acted? I mean, a nerve agent is not a small deal. If you wanted to kill this guy, why wouldn't you simply wait for him to walk home, stab him in the back as he walked in the street, and you could make it look like a mugging went wrong?
Or he falls under a tube train, or he hangs himself, or there are lots of other ways of doing it. So James,
particular way of killing someone.
James, tell me, who do you think, and you've studied this, you've spent the last 8 years studying this, Who do you think is responsible for this?
When I say I've studied this, it's been on an amateur basis. It's not my job.
Well, I suspect that you've got a bit more knowledge of this than almost anybody else listening to this show this morning.
Well, I'm not sure who really benefits without going into a conspiracy theory, because at the moment May seems to be trying to get a bit of a backbone and trying to stand up for herself, but then that goes into a conspiracy theorist. Did she order it? You just don't know. I'm not saying she did.
No.
It's like maybe she's just using the situation to her advantage. I don't know. There's just so many things we don't know.
All right, so basically, James, it's up in the air.
Yeah, and indeed there's also questions about legality as well. Under the OPCW, Russia officially has no more chemical weapons. So why hasn't that been mentioned? The last chemical weapon in Russia was destroyed, I think, 3 months ago.
Well, there was talk.
Supervision of the head of the OPCW.
There was talk, wasn't there, from a journalist who writes for the Irish Times, who was the Moscow correspondent back after the wall came down, that actually, circa 1993, all sorts of things got stolen and went missing, and nerve agent being taken then was possible. James, I thank you for your call. I thank you for your thoughts. I thank you for overcoming your nervousness and educating us about a lot to do with the Russian intelligence agencies. Thank you. Well, it is a big question. There is a huge consensus that's emerged around this. Maybe we should, just to persuade us one more time, listen to Gavin Williamson, our Defence Secretary, because he seemed to be absolutely certain.
Frankly, Russia should go away. It should shut up.
And they wonder why we're sceptical about our political class. Well, there we are.